Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Therapy by the Book, the show where we take your favorite fictional characters and ask the question, what would it be like if they came to therapy? My name is William Haddad, and joining me on today's episode is Jason Ouyang. Jason is a second-year doctoral student in clinical psychology at Pepperdine University. He's currently training at URM Angelus House and Believe Psychology Group. He's also a lead speaker for NAMI's Ending the Silence program, presenting to students, staff, and families alike on mental health, suicide prevention, and all manner of community resources. And to top it off, he's a senior member of the Center for Neuropsychology and Consciousness, which contributes to research all for the intersection of neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy, including published and ongoing works on neuroexistentialism, trauma, and the default mode network. Jason, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have you here today.
Hello, William. Yeah, thank you so much for welcoming and giving me the opportunity to speak and nerd out.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And speaking of nerding out, the character clients we have for today, we have two, in fact, that you picked out yourself. We're going to be looking at Daredevil and the Kingpin, both from the Marvel comic and cinematic universes. And you're more familiar with these characters than I am. So first thing I'm interested is what made you pick these characters?
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of the show. I don't promise to be the best comic book lore nerd, but I've always enjoyed the Netflix series since the first season. And over time, I guess I just sort of seeing how the showmakers were doing a really good job of analyzing certain themes that at least resonated with me, or things that I might have been thinking about at the time as well. And with the Born Again series, yeah, it's pretty much the same thing again, where it's sort of hitting a lot of relevant points, both on a sort of community, societal level, and individual basis.
Now, were you already involved in mental health work at the time that you got into the Netflix series?
Yeah, I would say so, in the sense that I'd already had my completed my undergrad in psych, but in terms of clinical work, no, not yet.
And just again, for people listening to the show, can you talk briefly about the type of clinical work you're currently doing and any areas of study, either at Pepperdine or in the groups that you're a part of, that are what you would say kind of your main focus or an area of interest that you do as a psychologist in training?
Yeah. So over at the Union Rescue Mission / Angelus House, we work with folks, who are working to transition themselves towards, other options, whether it be housing or employment. And so, we have a whole host of services: legal, dental, and then we at Pepperdine sort of help with the mental health clinic. And so there's a lot of trauma-informed care, and I'm grateful that my supervisor is a sort of a expert on somatic experiencing. So I've had a lot of opportunities to be supervised and trained under that framework and that site. But over at Belief Psychology, I've been really able to and grateful to been able to work with all sorts of folks from different backgrounds, all different kinds of needs and goals. And so we really take a really strong strength-based and supplement it with a positive psychology, as well as a trauma-informed approach. And I, of course, like to throw in my own mix of humanistic, existential, and psychodynamic too.
What about that approach makes it one that you like to throw in and top off with the other ones that you're learning right now?
I find that when I'm able to, being able to combine different approaches together seems to actually be able to meet more of the unique circumstances and presenting situations that people might come in with.
Yeah, I know it's common for most therapists and psychologists to want to draw from a wide array of different modalities and methods of approach, not just because it increases the number of clients who you're usually able to help out with what they're going through, but also because it's just fascinating to learn all these different ways that we can understand the mind and the body and utilize them. I think in active treatment, both actively and if you're more research based too, just exploring in the abstract sense, all the different ways that they intersect.
Yeah. I've always found that fascinating, and at a certain point, I had to admit to myself that a part of it is a bit selfish, coming from that academic curiosity or personal curiosity of how the mind works or how people work. But you know, in some ways, it's sort of bears similarities to a little bit about what Matt Murdock and Daredevil is does with his profession as well.
I was just going to say, talk about a duality, in every sense of the term, based on my own awareness of the character, which isn't as great as some characters in the Marvel universe, admittedly. But I know that Daredevil is very much Daredevil, Matt Murdock. They're quite separate in a lot of areas for how they both present to the world, despite being the same person, which isn't the case for every superhero. There's some superheroes where who they are as a hero is almost synonymous with who they are as a person. In fact, I think one of the best examples of that is Iron Man. Tony Stark says on multiple occasions, "I am Iron Man," and means it, and that he is almost, it's more that he and the suit are one, and that there's really no way to effectively say where Tony ends and Iron Man begins. But not the case, I think, for Matt Murdock and Daredevil.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting to think about that it is his most famous line. How he began in the first movie and sort of how he ended. I am Iron Man again. Yeah. But yeah, for Daredevil, it seems like it serves a different function. Being able to put on a mask, living the life of a vigilante at night, perhaps allowing him to do things that you might not otherwise be able to do as a lawyer by day.
And the fact that he is a lawyer, that during the day he works right to uphold the law and to serve the justice system, to be a representative and an avatar, right, of our legal system, our legislation. But I'm assuming that he's not really doing that as much when he's going out at night dressed as Daredevil. He's probably crossing a bit of a boundary there with some of the stuff he gets up to.
Yeah. The earlier seasons, they sort of show sort of the difficulty of the reality of trying to balance those two lifestyles. He's like showing up or missing cord, or showing up all bloodied and bruised up with no valid explanation to his friends. Um, yeah. So, but in the Born Again series, he's facing the series does more of a focus on highlighting a bit of the systemic challenges he faces, not just as a lawyer by day, but then how he integrates that. What meaning does he make of that?
Could you point to any specific examples of the kinds of challenges that you're talking about within the episodes?
One of the smaller ones, though still significant, sort of showing a bit of the nuance behind the challenges that we face on a systemic level. He has a client that is accused of essentially defrauding teachers, and he's very in the scene, he's very blasé about it, sort of like got his feet kicked up, looking at his phone, and just sort of self-aggrandizing, talking about how he shouldn't be facing all this sort of stuff, and then highlighting how the optics of having a blind lawyer, and then his partner at the firm, Kirsten McDuffie, who is African American woman. He says like, "Oh, a blind man and a black woman. I like the optics." That sort of exchange, when you hear that, at least for me, it sort of reminds me of some of the more, I would say, like modern aspects of the dialogue on justice and systemic issues that sometimes these the surface, on the optics of oh, like I'm going to attach myself to what people think is approved of now, without actually engaging in the substance of the issues, whether it be economic inequality, oppression, racism, marginalization, etc.
And you said that this guy who was being so blasé and blatant with his remarks, this is Murdoch's client that he's representing, that he's having to defend against the charges, or that he's working against in the case.
Yeah, he's defending him, and he does do a bit of a verbal snap So like that that small scene sort of showing a small but meaningful progression on showing Matt's sort of inner conflict about how he wants to actually navigate this system. But there are plenty of other so many more impactful moments as well related to that,
You
whether it be with
mentioned. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just saying whether it be with Punisher, Bullseye, Kingpin, Foggy, the whole lot.
Yeah, I can't even begin to imagine. It's a just probably an endless buffet line of, of flaws and imperfections that these people are lining up, um, for Matt to have to deal with. I like you use this phrase in the notes that you sent me for this episode. You called it a moral injury, which is then exacerbated. You said by having to defend someone who not only he doesn't like personally, but actually you know it sounds like considers to be in the wrong to begin with. And as a lawyer, it's not your job to I know to side one way or the other with which way the case is should be from an objective moral standpoint. Your job is to present the best legal defense you can for whichever side that you're representing. Um, but for Matt, it's for Matt Murdock. It sounds like he's someone who struggles with that because, correct me if I'm wrong, he has a very strong internal sense of right and wrong, and takes very much to heart instances of moral injury or racism or ableist, tokenization, and people who are just abusive of the system and of the basic courtesy and rights that we all try to abide by.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty. From the show, it seems like it's pretty much all he thinks about. Like he just wakes up, thinking like, what am I doing? Is it right or wrong? He's deeply reflecting continually, and it seemed like he had done. He got into a really good spot, at the beginning of this series, and then with the first episode, with the whole events around Bullseye murdering Foggy, and then him getting his revenge in that very same episode with the intention to kill, as he pushed him off the roof. So in his mind, he had essentially come to terms with himself being a killer in that moment, and from that episode up until all the way till I say when the bank robbery happens, um, he sort of avoids the mantle for some time.
And why does he do that? Do you know? Like, what is it that makes him avoid it? Because he crossed a line by killing, uh, by committing that act?
In his worldview, as his his view of vigilantism, and this has been explored previous times. Yeah, that fine line between vengeance and justice. It's a very dangerous and delicate line that he goes through, and it's a sort of a common phenomenon, as like groups and communities that dole out justice. We've many stories down history, about how the danger of mob justice.
Yeah, mob justice or street justice or all the other all the other variations. I agree that crop up when we feel that either we're confronted with a situation that we feel the system uh, can't help, or it plays to a culture or a people, that it's simply not compatible with what is also available. It's interesting, vengeance versus justice. That's also a common theme, I think, in not to go off on a tangent, but in a lot of the Batman films and adaptations.
Oh
That's
yeah.
often a line that Bruce Wayne struggles with his own. Definitely, there's an element of vengeance in what he has chosen to do as Batman because of what happened to his parents. But it's also true that he has that really strong code of he does not kill people, no matter how much he might beat up criminals. That's a line that he morally just refuses to cross. I'm not as familiar with Daredevil, but it sounds like he has a similar internal code that he tries to abide by as a vigilante to keep himself from. It sounds like crossing over into that same camp as people who deal mob justice and so forth.
Yeah, it serves as sort of a lifeline. You know, before he jumps into the abyss. Something that can ground him. So at the end of the day, he doesn't feel like he's the very thing that he hates, and because for him it goes deep. With going back to like his father being killed, well, literally by the mob for throwing a fight. So his dad one night just wanted to just win one night, just to make his son proud, doing what he thought felt right, and he was killed for it by the criminal underworld. And so for Matt Murdock, being a lawyer is not just a way of making money. In a way, with the vigilantism, one might see that as a form of sublimation. That defense mechanism in which we channel certain urges in a more acceptable way, so they can be expressed as somehow.
Would you say that in Murdoch's case, is he conscious that this is something that he's enacting and using to I don't want to say compensate, but to serve a need, and to serve that sense or that desire for justice that his father's murder left him with?
I would say maybe not so much on a very conscious level, not like necessarily mentioning it or referring to it explicitly, but his experience of it was quite traumatic, and that'll sort of relate to the conceptualization and diagnosis as well. But it seems like within the new series that question and conversation does happen, and we are able to join him in that journey of how he is able to make meaning and integrate these sides of himself, sort of starting from the beginning of the series of sort of putting down the helmet and then heeding the call.
Wow, that's interesting. What do you think changes in the new series that allows him to start to make that shift in mindset and to be more accepting?
I feel like it just came from hitting a point where almost all is lost. That's sort of like a climactic point within the sort of protagonist's conflict or journey, where all of a sudden the stakes have just been raised, and the resources that you thought you had aren't there, and you got to do everything you can to save the person or the day. And he finds himself in multiple of those situations throughout the series, where he recognizes that truly, if he had not intervened as Daredevil, then who knows what could have happened.
It's interesting you bring up the aspect of the protagonist's journey into that, because I agree 100%. In the old hero's journey or Hero with 1,000 Faces narrative that Joseph Campbell pioneered back in the 60s, that was always an element, that the moment of realization and the capacity for growth and change tended to come at a point when an individual was at rock bottom, when they'd been pushed to the very brink, whether it was by the evil confronting them or whether it was by misfortune and circumstance of their own doing, or simply by chance. And it's when the theme seems to be in a lot of stories, and certainly Marvel and superhero stories are, I think, really, really good, in particular at exemplifying this phenomenon, is that when all else has been taken from us and we're left with only nothing but our core self as the last line of defense, can we find the potential in ourselves to finally embrace it and use it in a way that it was meant to be used?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I feel like, at least personally, why I enjoy superhero stories, superheroes in general. Not so much for, of course, the fantasy and flying around with powers. That's cool and awesome. But I think the best superhero stories are the ones that really analyze the character and context of their origin and their powers. And it's not just, oh, they have powers and and everything is fine. And so in a way we can relate to, even though they might have superpowers, we still see them struggle and try to find, something inside of them, like we aspire to reach our potential, or to do that thing or to express that thing we've always wanted to.
I'd say that's what helps make superheroes the most relatable. That despite having the ability to fly or shoot lasers or blow up buildings with a flick of the hand, they still feel as we do. They still encounter a lot of the same emotional dilemmas that we do. And it's when those components are thrown into sharper relief that we're able to humanize in our minds those superheroes as not just being these gods, these beings of greatness, but also see them as similar to us in the sense that they have to feel and overcome a lot of the issues that we do too. Which is, I think you're right that's what makes for the best superheroes, are the ones where those elements of the character come into play as well.
With Daredevil, he really has to confront dilemmas that, even though we might not be a crime fighting lawyer, we still can relate to the dilemmas he faces. And that, I feel like one of the most poignant ones is that idea of what it means to be a good person. Simply put, it's really exemplified in his conversation with Bullseye when he visits him in prison, and Bullseye says to him, in another life you might be defending me, because isn't that what good people do? They defend their worst enemies. And then Daredevil proceeds to smash his head on the table and knock out a tooth. He's sort of indicating what kind of, how he's feeling at that time. He's very, very conflicted and activated in regards to that, because he killed his best friend, and and he's saying, like, would you still defend the person you hate the most?
Is because I haven't seen the scene, so I'm curious. Is Bullseye? Do you think Bullseye is asking that question because he knows it'll get to him, or is he asking that question genuinely, like he wants an answer from Daredevil because he's curious about the conundrum himself?
There's definitely curiosity, but also a genuine ask for help, because Bullseye was in genuine danger in the prison, so he was legitimately looking for Matt to help him out.
That's a tough position. I mean, for anybody to be put in as a lawyer, but certainly for Matt Murdock, because of who he also is as Daredevil. There's just a lot of emotional conflict that sounds like it was coming up for him then.
Yeah, and it's something he's still not sure of, because that question gets sort of answered when he ends up taking a bullet for Kingpin at this black and white ball that Fisk was hosting.
Murdock takes the bullet.
Yeah. Coincidentally enough, from Bullseye.
Oh my gosh!
Because
I really have to see the show now.
Yeah. I don't know about your policy on spoiler alerts. I apologize ahead of time.
I know you're good. You're good. I don't care. I'm happy to hear it for this, and the people watching this know to expect spoilers if we're talking about these characters.
Right. Yeah. Of course. Now I said it. Yeah. Of course, he had broken out, and so all three are in that room. Oh yeah, it was Punisher. Yeah, who asked him, like, I think, why the heck did you do that for him? That scumbag, that person, and even he said he wasn't sure why. And so we see the action, but at this point, even Matt I don't think has fully really integrated or found some congruence in his actions and values just yet.
Well, speaking of Fisk, I want to pivot to him now too, since he's also one of our referrals for today. You mentioned that he's almost a mirror of Matt Murdock's inner conflict, in that he readily embraces being violent, being dominant, and going after other people, whatever means necessary, while Matt really, as we've seen already, struggles with his, often actively trying to suppress it to the point that it bursts out in moments like with Bullseye. So what else about Fisk stands out to you, both in contrast to Murdock, but also just as a character in his own right?
Well, this is sort of falls in line with the series where the villain can be more interesting, kind of like the Joker. I feel like this is definitely the case as well. He serves as an excellent mirror or foil, in the sense that we see some similar trajectories and manifestations. Starting with just the history, Fisk's father also died when Fisk was very young. Except the difference was Fisk murdered him because his father was violent. I believe at like 12 or 10 or something like that, picked up a hammer and bashed his head. And so he took that experience and embraced it, using brutality and violence to survive, to control. Whereas for Matt, his experience showed him a different path of seeking justice to right that wrong, as opposed to him being judge, jury, and executioner.
That's really interesting. Yeah, so similar backgrounds, but different answers to the same problem is what I'm hearing. These two both came to. Although it sounds like as well, Matt still struggles at times with controlling his desire to turn to violence as a last resort when the better path appears to be failing. Is that right too?
Yeah, and he dips a toe. He dabbles crossing that line every now and then. With that bullseye being that most recent one, and he feels a lot of distress and emotional distress around it because it's conflicting what he perceives to be his worldview. For Fisk, his way of embracing it, the showmakers sort of show that contrast where Fisk's violent side and psychopathy is rooted in that childhood trauma as well. There's that wonderful scene where they cut back and forth between Daredevil fighting Muse, and at that point Daredevil is pissed because Muse had kidnapped the White Tiger's niece, and a dearly loved friend, about to have her blood extracted and used for art. Who wouldn't be pissed? And so within the fight choreography, you could see it reflected in his anger, his rage, his determination to defeat him. And then on the other end, we see an angry yet calm Fisk confronting his wife's ex-lover, Adam, as he throws an axe to the floor and regales him with times of his childhood where he learned that a tool can be a great equalizer when he used to fight, against men multiple sizes larger than him when he was a boy. Filling in with the lore while just being an ultimate badass and just throwing his enemy an axe and then stepping out. But then as he's just wailing a tune on him, this is consistent with his fighting style. It's brutal, like a wrestler, a brawler, but it also has elements of like a child, just a huge child, just rage pounding on you. And there's this one moment where he just slams him on the table and he screams like, "Mine!" So literally like an enraged child who's beating up another kid for taking his his toy or talking to his crush. And so for him, that those nuances just within a few words or the physical choreography really go to communicate how Fisk operates and what's going on in his head.
Yeah, gosh, what a powerful scene. I haven't seen it, but I have to agree, just based on that description. It sounds like you've got powerful insight onto Fisk's inner character there, in that it's this uh, furious little boy rising up to the surface at these moments of pure rage and just venting. It sounds like all of that hurt, all of that trauma, all of that rage that the circumstances of his childhood left him with. And that's interesting. So if he's talking about using tools as a way to compensate, then it's, he's, to me as a therapist, that tells me that he was somebody who was forced out of necessity as a need for survival to turn to very extreme methods, but then later learned how to change his own narrative to see himself as this dominating protagonist of this survival narrative that was born out of pain and trauma. Yet at the same time, because we were talking about how the scene isn't just Fisk alone, it's a crosscut between Matt beating down Muse, even as Fisk is beating up Adam. Uh, Correct me if I'm wrong, but that suggests that in this instant, really, even if this is not the case the rest of the time, the two of them are not that different in their violence, in their willingness to give in to their base instincts in moments of extreme emotional arousal.
Yeah, and it's an idea presented very early on in the season where Kingpin basically says to Daredevil, to Matt, that I don't remember the exact verbiage, but it's like it's difficult to come to terms with one's nature. And so like that's sort of one of the prevalent running themes. What is our nature and what is our relationship to it? And that is very very strong connection for psych-minded folks who sort of think about how that might show up in like a therapeutic work or a session.
Absolutely. I'm reminded of some of the work I read by Dr. Jonathan Shea, who was a psychiatrist therapist who worked with American veterans of Vietnam. And the question of coming to terms with one's nature is it's different in that sense, but still the struggle in that struggling to accept that one is capable of committing terrible acts of violence, whether on the battlefield or in this case is with Fisk and Murdoch in the underworld of the city, and yet also have beliefs that align one to good or to justice or to wanting more than just violence to be what defines your life. It's a hard dilemma to face, and I think accepting your nature when violence is irrevocably intertwined with your nature, it makes it all the harder.
Yeah, it's not an easy task for anyone individually, nor is it easy, for, honestly, on the clinician end, to it's an active effort to be able to help hold that space to both sit with leaning towards authenticity, be yourself, as well as being open to change.
As a clinician, what are some steps that you might take or do take, with the clients you're already working with to help make that possible?
Well, I'm a huge fan of two truths. From the dialectical behavioral approach, being able to sit with maybe what someone might think are conflicting truths. And so in this case, with Daredevil, there's this need to respect his experience, because that's sort of that shows up in who he is and every day how he shows up. And at the same time, there's merit, there's merit for some work as well.
I think that we can assume Daredevil and Fisk. I mean, it's a dual referral. So obviously, we're going to be seeing them both together as I guess you could almost say kind of a working couple, in the sense that they both operate along paths that intersect a lot. But I think we'll also be probably doing some individual work with the two of them as well. What might be your initial approach to treatment? What are some questions that you might ask, and what would you, as a therapist, as their therapist, what are some things that you would want to be mindful of going into those first few sessions?
There are definitely similarities and differences. They're both working in the system, but in totally different places. Him being a lawyer at his firm, and then him being the mayor of New York City. So there's going to be some differences based on the most recent events. With Matt Murdock, Daredevil, him in particular, I'd be very curious to explore this. And you had mentioned it before previously. This idea of duality. I imagine that for him, there's almost like something that I can't even begin to imagine, but like putting on the costume and literally going out at night. I imagine there's some sort of identity shift going on, where he might see things differently and judge things differently and feel things differently, but still being Matt Murdock on some level. And what's his relationship to that? One interesting way of working with clients who may be either a bit resistant when it comes, or just not comfortable or unable to at the time to verbalize certain things. What we can do is attend to the felt sense, essentially somatic bodily awareness, because as our conscious mind is seeing things and sorting through things, our body is also having a relationship and a conversation with the environment, and that's how oftentimes trauma can show up too, trauma symptoms.
Yes, so true, so true.
For Matt, we definitely see, of course, flashbacks, a lot of rumination, hyper focus on threats. Although, if I was his clinician, I would, from a strength-based perspective, respect that as part of his his need to fight crime. Sometimes you gotta hyper focus on threats. Respect that, but nevertheless, I'll call it as I sees it. Definitely some emotional withdrawal, some avoidance occurring, and that's affecting his ability to form and maintain his attachments throughout the series. He gets called out by his partner, by his PI. Like, what the heck is going on, Matt? There's also negative cognitions, in the sense of his certain beliefs have been so grossly torn and twisted. And so for him, now he's realizing and really fully believing in this possibility that the world is truly corrupt, that he can't trust the institutions he worked his whole life to serve, and that he thought was the answer. And of course, we see some arousal, some reactivity with the hypervigilance. Of course, the physical outbursts, with the example with Bullseye using his head as a beach ball on the metal table, and of course some sleep disturbance. So, we're working, with possibly some chronic PTSD as well.
Yeah, agreed. Chronic PTSD, I think, is probably the diagnosis I would give too. Not just because it's a constant part of his daily life, though that is a big contributor, but also I think because it goes back to his childhood as well, with a lot of the inner motivations or pathos, or whatever term you want to describe to it, having roots in ultimately the murder of his father and the impact that it left on him. I don't know if it's ever explored in the series whether Matt feels personal guilt for his father's death, since it was for his sake that his father chose not to throw the fight. But it wouldn't surprise me if there's that element was present too.
Yeah. The earlier seasons definitely covered that way more, just to really flesh out the character. What is it? Is it unresolved still? Yeah, there's an argument for that, and depending on his preferences and his discretion, we might approach that from a number of angles, whether it be like an internal family systems perspective, where we can come up and conceptualize certain parts of his his working system, and where they came from, and if he might have any, to use a bit of the jargon, any exiles that he might be dealing with in regards to the loss of his father. We could also look at an EFT perspective, where he might be able to engage in some chair dialogue with either aspects of himself, or being able to role play his father at a certain time, to address any possible unfinished or unresolved business, sort of redefining of his narrative.
I wonder if the empty chair intervention could work in the sense also between, as a way to have a dialogue with himself, sort of between Matt Murdock and Daredevil, between those two personas within him, to try to see if there's a way to create an understanding or realize a new truth about what each of them is meant to be.
I might ask him to bring the helmet, as he
Yeah.
switches back and forth to really get into character.
There you go.
No, that's a really good point, and that definitely hits home with what we might think of like a shadow integration work, aspects of ourselves that we might have not really been aware of or had shuddered to various corners of our psyche, but still show up. This could be his shadow in the sense that, with his experience and trauma, leaving this strong desire to dole out justice, to do right in the wrong world.
I really like what you said before too about the concept of the two truths from DBT, which even outside of that modality, I think any therapist could probably use that, and it would have an impact on him in session, because it allows for the concept of moral grayness in how we hold ourselves emotionally accountable and sit in judgment on our inner selves, our shadow selves, like you were talking about. And for Matt, there seems to be just so much conflict right now revolving around these two halves of himself, the Murdoch lawyer and the Daredevil vigilante, and finding a way to, I think, allow the two to coexist more peacefully might begin with introducing the idea of why can't both sides be right?
Yeah, I'd be curious what it would be like for him to sit with that and possibly be able to live with both. With the court case with White Tiger Ayala, that was probably the most disillusioning and traumatic for him. Not only the death of a friend and fellow vigilante, but then also, that grand disillusionment with the system. He really busted his butt, jumped over through every hole and legal strategy, doing it the right way to acquit him, and then he gets shot in the head the very next night.
That's terrible. Again, to harken back to the writings of Dr. Shea, it's what we would call a betrayal of what's right. It's an act that destroys a sense of expectation that we take for granted and how the fabric of our society is supposed to operate with a certain innate fairness. That he was acquitted, which means nothing bad is supposed to happen to him now. It's over. We defended him, and yet this bullet proves otherwise.
Yeah, and he's living these conditions of, I should have done this or that, what ifs. And from then on in the series, that serves almost as a tipping point towards the transition back.
Pivoting now to Wilson Fisk, who's our referral as well. Would you take a similar approach with him, or knowing that even though his emotions and his methods may be similar to Daredevil's, his intent and his background have some key differences? What might shift in your clinical approach?
Wilson Fisk is definitely more of a man of the senses. It's shown throughout. He's the enjoyer of art and wine and food and taste and style and all that sorts of stuff. So when I see that, I see client strengths and assets. This is me, being able to defend my worst enemy here. This is sometimes something that we as clinicians have to deal with, among other occupations with ethical stakes. How do we show up in a room with a person we abhor, but we still have a duty to help them and do what we can.
Right. And we can look at them, even if from a personal level we may not agree with them, that doesn't mean that we can't meet them where they're at, or look at the circumstances of their life through their eyes and acknowledge, as you say, like that these are, for him, these are strengths, and these are very real strengths. And in a sense, because of what we were talking about earlier, based on his own upbringing and his childhood and the lengths that he had to go to, it sounds like, to survive what must have been a very brutal series of circumstances, it absolutely is a strength that he created and used to great effect to get out of that place.
Yeah, and so that would definitely be, part of our rapport building in the very first place. One main goal would definitely be exploring his childhood trauma and sort of the manifestations of that trauma. For him, he definitely is more prone to rage than Matt, though both are pretty prone. Wilson just a touch more. So I think it might be helpful for us to work either and or through both a cognitive tracking as well as a somatic tracking of these moments of activation, and essentially perform a functional analysis and create and identify the network of thoughts, behaviors, attitudes, because for him it can get quite complicated. In the new series, he starts to almost develop this savior complex. I'm not exactly sure how he feels, but it seems like there's some element of him genuinely believing that he's saving the city.
Do you get a sense of saving from what? What it is he thinks he's saving the city from?
That's the tough part. Yeah, on the in the newspapers and announcements, he talks about vigilantism, and so his stuff sort of harkens back to the older days in New York where there was a stop and frisk policies going on. There's a poster with stop and fisk, uh, but he
Oh man.
essentially establishes martial law where the cops don't have cameras, no due process, all that sorts of stuff, in the name of safety.
That's an extreme to go to, and it sounds like that would be a question for the therapy session. Is well, why does that matter to you? What is it about vigilantism that demands such a strong response on a citywide level?
It may be in line with this running theme of power and control, but translated or even sublimated. So in this case, Wilson Fisk channeling that strong desire for control in a societal acceptable way by becoming, well, literally one of the most societally accepted people, being a mayor.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's all connected. As I say this a lot with my co-host Daniel on our episodes, is that the elements of the need for control or need for survival or how a trauma from our past first impacts us, it all connects back to the present day and what we then often observe or subconsciously, without observing, um, act out in the decisions and lifestyle choices we make. And many times, finding that sense of power and control on a larger level is still serving part of a deeper inner need that goes back to what really was a need that we had initially, at least on a very basic, very innocent level.
Yeah, and I feel, touching back to Matt's side with his strengths, I feel he might be able to work really well with this trauma through his superpowers, essentially, in the sense that he is blind, but he's very sensitive, and the history of his training shows that he had learned the arts of mindfulness and focus and concentration in order to hear and detect and navigate the world as a person without sight. And so for him, I feel he would be open and really able to engage with whether it be mindfulness or guided imagery or sort of progressive muscle relaxation.
Yeah, and I wonder too, because you mentioned that Fisk is also, in his own way, a very much a somatically oriented individual with his appreciation of the arts, of culture, of what he wears and how he dresses. His although Matt Murdock can't follow along in perfect, synchronism with that type of awareness. They're both, it sounds like, individuals who understand the significance of being in touch with the senses and what that does to our bodies and how that could work together. if we're seeing them in a couple session at one point, I wonder if that might not be a potential starting point to build off of for both of them. If anything, just so that they're not at each other's throats right off the bat when we're when we're sitting down together.
Yeah, I don't think I would stand 1 second of being able to hold either of them back from each other. But yeah, that's an interesting possibility of integrating perhaps a common channel of strengths that they might both carry. When I was thinking of Fisk, for him, being the lover of art, being able to analyze and express his thoughts and insights about it and feelings, and even connect his life experiences to it, that's just a natural thing I feel we can utilize, whether through existing art for reflective exploration and discussion, or in-session activities or interventions, such as free flow art therapy, or more of a structured, guided exercise, like drawing your visualization of a certain kind of space and path, and what that might represent. All sorts of that, where I feel he would really resonate with. Although with Matt, I think we might have to find an activity that both of them can sort of engage with on a similar level. So, perhaps something related to texture or tactile touch might be useful for both of them. For Kingpin, a grounding technique, sort of like bringing along pleasant sensory things for him to help calm him from throwing a tantrum.
I'm thinking
whereas
of
for Matt,
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, whereas for Matt, it would be more for helping him bring himself back to the present moment with his relationships and his work and his friends, as opposed to the rumination or the slight dissociation he might feel as he's so hyper focused on his thoughts about guilt and all that sorts of stuff.
I like that. Yeah, touch as a grounding technique for both of them is probably something, from what you've told me, they would both be able to relate to in their own way. I'm thinking of the sand tray activity, or even doing some work with gardening. So anything that could take them outdoors, or into meditation in a rock garden or a similar environment. A lot of those aspects of finding one's inner calm and using just physical touch or the environment around them to enhance their own awareness of how their bodies and emotions are interconnected, and the conversations they're having with themselves. I think that process, if we're seeing them both together, would probably take some time to build up to, just because we would first have to find a way for the two of them to feel like they could do that in safety in the same room with each other. Though I don't know about you. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. I think for my part, I would begin couples work with the two of them doing more dialogue based to begin with, asking them both to share their own beliefs, their own values, so I can get as clear a sense as possible about where each of them is coming from, with the very strong feelings they have about each other and the world. And then from there, if we're able to eventually meet in the middle, maybe using the two truths technique eventually as a possible bridge, I like the idea definitely of going into more somatic work after that point. But what do you think?
No, I think that would be a really good start, sort of getting a lay of the land and helping them establish their needs, preferences, goals, so everyone's on the same page. We as the audience are privy to some of the thoughts that they may not share with each other. After he takes the bullet for Kingpin, as the audience member, you naturally think there'd be some smidget of sympathy elicited from that grand act that Matt did for him. But he immediately turns that into an opportunity to help his narrative, and he orders his henchmen to go to the hospital to finish the job. So me knowing that somehow, that would definitely inform my beginning approach, knowing that on the behavioral level, Matt exemplified that mantra of truly turning the other cheek, being the good Catholic boy, of truly defending even his worst enemies. And then how does he feel after the fact? And Fisk still wants to to end him and to see his world crumble. How does Matt feel about that in terms of his own relationship with Kingpin? Will he see it as a source of frustration or anger, or even a source of inspiration for him to truly live up to his ideals of never killing anyone and looking out for people, even your worst enemy, to not just kill them in cold blood?
It would be a stark contrast to begin treatment with, coming into session with the two of them from such opposite ends of objectives and of values. With all that in mind, what might your long-term treatment expectations be? Because as therapists, it's, of course we want to help people. Many of us are proud to do it, but it's also not our job ultimately to fix people or change their mindset. It's not about convincing them to see things from our point of view or even from another's point of view, so much as it is just to help them better understand themselves. With that in mind, what are your thoughts about the long-term impact of therapy for these two individuals?
Yeah, for Matt on the the individual level, in terms of just pure symptomology, yeah, hopefully we'd be able to see some reduction in the internalized guilt, hypervigilance, self-destructive ideation, because that's a safety issue for us for sure. So we have to look out for that as clinicians. Overall, more long term and more interestingly, it'd be cool to see how he might work with integrating his dual self, in the sense of, on my clinician end, I will on some level respect his vigilante actions. I don't know what the ethics are for the APA if you run into a blind vigilante, but on the purely clinical end, yeah, on to some degree, I would respect his decision independently to go out there and do what he truly believes is right, just based off his emotional experience of what he's going through. Yeah, I could see that he genuinely believes, even if it's not true, that he has an important role to play, the critical role. And people's lives are at stake, if he doesn't. On some level, I have to respect that. And at the same time, I might encourage the space to look at other ways of integrating and channeling without breaking a dude's knee in an alley.
For sure.
Not saying he has to quit that cold turkey, but balance in all things. And so perhaps some form of like community advocacy. And this is something that non-powered clients and we work with as well. Like how do we deal with this sort of like our pent up growing dissatisfaction with certain systems or institutions? Ideally, we let clients go where they want to with that, but still opening and encouraging, if they wish, to be able to apply that desire into something meaningful.
Jason, just to wrap up for today, I want to ask you now, on a personal note, what's your favorite thing about being a therapist?
I purposely didn't think about this question because I wanted to be as genuine as possible. So you're getting me real thinking, right? It's something we definitely continually reflect on. Man, I'd say more recently, this feeling, and actually some folks even just straight up saying that they feel like they're able to get something different in the space that they cannot in their lives. And so, yeah, that makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside, because I try to really facilitate that kind of energy and space that folks might be looking for in certain times of their life, so that whatever was unseen can be seen without refraction or judgment. What's been unheard can finally be heard and gratefully witnessed on my end.
I like that phrase, gratefully witnessed. That's very beautiful.
I didn't come up with it. That's the humanistic people. That's the humanistic stance.
I won't tell anybody. Jason, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been wonderful talking with you, and I wish you all the best and great success as you continue your learning and your studies, and what I'm sure will be a wonderful career all ahead of you.
I appreciate you a lot, William. Yeah, thank you for this opportunity, and yeah, I had a lot of fun.